Mr. Sherman by Josh Bell. Mr. Sherman shook when he gestured, and it gave his hands and arms the look of stiff rubber. He was quadriplegic, but had regained the ability to move his arms slightly. Probably because he loved to smoke.
Now we just need to get the rest of you addicted to something, I said.
He'll moonwalk out of here. He laughed. The pigeon next to us flitted its wings in the afternoon sun, then went back to lunch break crumbs. Anything you can smuggle in here, kid, is greatly appreciated. He sat slumped over his belly in his chair at the end of the picnic table. I was next to him, kitty corner, on the table's bench. He was 46, plump, with a handsome round face. There were patches of white stubble under his chin and on the sides of his neck. Wiry hairs poked from his nostrils. It was alarming how much was missed when the face being shaved wasn't your own.
I'd become a cosmetologist a few years later, with that thought and Mr. Sherman in mind.
His arm came up shakily, and he bent his head just enough to puff the cigarette wedged between his numb fingers. Thanks again for this, he said. I nodded. He's a big fucker. The pigeon looked like Orson Welles. You know, everyone always talks about not being able to walk or ride or fuck. A cloud turned everything cool and gray for an instant, then it was warm again. He trembled in his chair and stuck his chin up. I can't feel the sun. He grit his teeth. 14 goddamn years I can't feel the sun, or rain, or the wind on my back.
Shit, I said. I never thought of that. I really hadn't.
He took another pained puff and blew smoke into the breeze. He kept coming back to the hospital in downtown Boston where I worked as a unit coordinator because he refused to follow the basic rules that would otherwise keep him safe.
Don't smoke, don't drink, do your exercises, etc.
He was almost always here to treat some horrific infection. They would shake their heads and point to x-rays with alarming dark patches like ghouls in them. He would laugh. Anybody got a smoke? I felt awful for him.
That was part of the problem.
He didn't want you to feel bad for him, and yet there was a side of him which demanded exactly that. It was all very confusing. A beautiful nurse walked out the double doors in tight pink scrubs on her way to the credit union. Sherman narrowed his eyes and leered. The dappled sunlight slithered around her curves as she strode,
tall, long-necked, and blonde.
I tell you something, Cal, he said. I just don't give a fuck. She opened the door to the
credit union and was gone.
Sure you do, I said. I stared at the side of his face. There was no way to fathom all that suffering. But what good was it feeling bad all the time? Look, I said, you have a ton to offer. I counted on my fingers. You're funny, sardonic, interesting as hell. I'm a piss puddle who shits his pants. There was a pungent smell of burnt hair. Jesus, your hand! I grabbed the smoldering butt from the charred crotch of his finger and threw it on the ground. He looked down and laughed bounce. Smells like pork. Can I get another? I lit a smoke and stuck it between his lips. Please, I said. Try and be careful. He shot angry gray eyes at me. Fuck does it matter? It matters, I said. He turned his head and looked longingly at the credit union door. I could have fucked anyone I wanted back in the day. Here we go, I thought. I'd heard it all before. Sure, maybe I was a bit of an asshole. Was? I said. He smiled. Well, I had threesomes. Fucking threesomes, he nodded. You? I only recently started having twosomes. I was a onesome guy for a real long... That's stupid. Really, drop all that corny shit. Fuck you. Fuck you. We stared at each other. The guy in the far corner behind Mr. Sherman in the shade looked up from his paper. We laughed. The poor guy got up, folded the paper, trotted down the aisle to the hospital doors, and hurried inside. Just in time, too. Put this fag in my hand, will ya? I'd made the mistake of giving Sherman a brief history of the word. Now he wouldn't stop using it. You do it, I said. Too tired. He coughed and squinted through the smoke. Come on, man. I'll tell Dara and Heather. They'll do their happy dance. His eyes went wide. Whenever Sherman did anything extra, or one of his exercises, or generally just tried, the ladies did their happy dance for him. This consisted of enthusiastic kisses on the cheek and jumping up and down a lot. He fucking loved it. They were the funnest, kindest, coolest nurses I'd ever known. He bent his head and reached up with full concentration. His arm shook, his fingers shook. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He slid his hand across his mouth and miraculously caught the cigarette between his fingers like the claw of a hammer. Holy shit, man! Yeah. But he was proud of himself. I could tell. A few minutes later, we headed inside. The unit was North 11, big and bright, and filled with grave patients waiting for or recovering from surgery. I was transcribing orders into a patient's chart when a white coat approached the front desk. "Calvin, old buddy, old pal." Dr. Preston was tall with dark wavy hair, green eyes, and a square face. "Hey, Doc. You still cutting hair?" "Yeah, for sure." "How much?" I can bring my shit in tomorrow and get you for 20?" He showed his straight white teeth and slapped the desk. "Deal. Tomorrow at lunch?" "Done." He reached over and we shook hands. "You're going to trust that kid to cut your hair?" Mr. Sherman had come in through the heavy automatic doors. The doctor and his coat turned. "Well, Mr. Smokes wherever he damn well pleases. How'd the test go?" "I wasn't paying attention." He tried to shrug. "Good?" I stood up and looked over the desk. "You should let me cut your hair," I said. "You need it." He stared at me. "I'm the hottest motherfucker in this place." He batted the little white stick on the chair's console, backed up and looked up at Dr. Preston. "Way hotter than this freak." We laughed as he zoomed down the hall to his room. "I don't care how mean he is, he ain't going to use that language on my floor." My desk mate, Bernice, had no trouble saying exactly what was on her mind. She smacked my shoulder with a stack of papers. "And you neither." Did I curse? Humph. She clipped the papers into a red binder. "I'm going to lunch. Can you handle all this?" "I'll be fine." "Sorry about the cursing, Bernie." "Never mind. I've been known to let fly in a moment or two of frustration." She looked over her glasses at me. "Or 3, or 4. She laughed, got up, shuffled around the big desk, and disappeared down the hall. There were a few new patients set to arrive that afternoon. I answered calls and built new patient charts in those ubiquitous red binders. Mr. Sherman came and asked me to go smoke. "I gotta wait for Bernice," I said. He buzzed away without a word. Bernice came back, and things got busy. We checked the new patients in, wrote their names up on the dry erase board, and put their charts on the shelf in the back for the nurses and doctors to review and revise. After the mini rush, things slowed down. The halls were empty, and all was quiet. "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you!" There was trouble in the back of the unit. Bernice and I looked at each other. I got up and ran down the hall. My heels chirped on the polished floor. It was Mr. Sherman's room. Now I could smell what had happened. Smoke billowed from his open bathroom door. He was struggling in his chair while Pete, his physical therapist, tried to find the cigarette in his smoldering lap. "Shit," I said, disappointed. "This trick again?" Mr. Sherman looked up. His face was a red tomato. "Fuck you too!" Water exploded from the ceiling. Pete gasped. I ran in to help push the chair out of there. It was very loud. The water was cold and wet, and we were drenched. He can't feel it, I thought. It was a hellish, claustrophobic thought. I was suddenly glad to be uncomfortable and wet. Mr. Sherman was discharged shortly after the fiasco. His room was cleaned, the floor was mopped, the sprinkler replaced. We smoked one last cigarette, said our goodbyes, and that was that. 3 weeks later, he was back. Too much drinking. The recommendation was to never drink. Crazy bastard. "You got Preston and Richardson?" "Yep," I said. "Smart docs, looking for quality haircuts." Then a few days later, Dara and I sat across from each other in the nurse's lounge. She was hunting for ripe tomatoes in her Tupperware salad. I sipped hot Tide tea out of a paper cup from the Happy Monk Cafe down the street. "Hey," Dr. Richardson poked his head in. "My wife loves it." "Oh, I'm so glad," I said. "The ultimate compliment." "Excuse me, doctor." Someone interrupted. He was back to his rounds. "Their haircuts look great," Dara said. She pointed her fork at me. "You should be a stylist." "I'm thinking about it." Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God." "What?" "You have to cut Mr. Sherman's hair." "Oh," I said. "Yeah, I ask him all the time. He doesn't trust me. Even told him I'd do it for free." She shook her head. "And nothing?" "Nothing." She went back to her salad. I sipped my tea and turned a People magazine around. Charlie Sheen and Denise Richards were having a baby. Well, who gives a... Did that scumbag tell you I took my titty out? I nearly spilled my tea. I cleared my throat. Yeah, yes. What's wrong with him? I shrugged. I didn't mention it, because I absolutely did not believe him. Of course not, she said. Who'd believe a thing like that? She winked. Make sure he doesn't tell anyone else, though. Well, holy shit. It seemed Mr. Sherman still had a bit of that old-time magic he always talked about. Dara was fairy tale beautiful. She did, though, he said. We were alone in the elevator on our way back up to the unit. She totally showed me, he pleaded. It was perfect, and I took my meds all week because of it. She's a saint. Look, I said, I believe you. I raised my hand. Really. But you can't go around talking about it. You'll get her in trouble. Oh, he nodded, then looked straight ahead. Right, right. Now that he knew that I knew, he relaxed. Just a regular old disgusting guy, I thought. It must have been wonderful to feel so normal. Later that week, he finally let me cut his hair. We went to the huge gray bathroom next to the charge nurse office, and I propped the door open for air. I tied my smock and clipped a black nylon cape around him. His stubble from weeks ago had turned into a terrible beard. I trimmed and shaped it very carefully, then turned my attention to the thick nest of salt and pepper hair. I methodically cropped the back and the sides, first with my clippers, then with scissors and comb. Snip, snip, comb, comb, snip, snip. There was cutting-edge research happening in neuroscience and robotics that would benefit folks with spinal cord injuries. A patient's chest was cracked open in the hallway a few weeks ago, and his heart was massaged by hand. He survived. Bullshit, he said. Ask anyone. Now I blended the sides into the top with a point-cutting technique. I combed a careful vertical section, held the hair up and out between two fingers, and chipped into it. Snip, snip, snip. I worked my way around his head. There was much he couldn't talk about now. He only smiled and looked away when I brought it up. Come on, I said. You could tell me. Snip, snip. But his lips were sealed. I finished the cut and brushed the textured length back with my fingers. I took a step back. I had done what any competent cosmetologist would have. I had made his round face oval. All right, I said. Ready? He nodded. There was hair all over the floor. I held up the mirror. He turned his head to one side, then the other. Whoa! He looked shocked. I'm a totally different guy. Again he turned his head, carefully examining his beard this time. He looked up, very serious. Thank you. His eyes were wet. I had never seen Mr. Sherman get emotional before. There had only ever been ambivalence and anger from him. But here, for the first, was something tender and raw and real. Pussy, I said. We fell apart laughing. People had to poke their heads in to see what was so damn funny. He looked very handsome. The doctors and nurses were impressed. He was in the hospital for a week and a half after that and had gone to all his appointments without protest. Very strange. And have you seen him smiling? They'd say. Nurses, doctors, technicians. I never saw the man smile till you gave him that haircut. Nah, I'd say. They didn't know. Then we were outside again. You been taking your meds? I said. He looked very healthy somehow, even with the cigarette in his hand. Mr. Sherman's chin came up steady and sure in the sun. I imagine it felt very warm. His beard was trim and the lines were straight and clean. He smiled. It was a handsome smile. Haven't missed a dose.